My girlfriend broke up with me after 5 years together, and now I don't know who I am without her. Hey Reddit, I'm Jake, 27, and I'm currently going through one of the hardest times of my life. My girlfriend, Sarah, 26, broke up with me after 5 years together, and I feel like my world has been turned upside down. Our relationship wasn't perfect, no one's is, but I never thought it would end like this. Now that she's gone, I'm realizing just how much of my life, my identity, was wrapped up in her, in us. Here's how we met, how things slowly started falling apart, and how I'm trying to figure out who I am without her. It was my sophomore year of college, and I was 20, still figuring out who I wanted to be. Back then, I wasn't one of those guys who always had a girlfriend. I was focused on school, figuring out my future, and trying not to drown in the expectations my parents had set for me. But all of that changed the night I met Sarah. We were at one of those classic college parties, loud music, cheap beer, and too many people crammed into a small space. I didn't even want to be there, to be honest. I had a paper due on Monday, and I had planned to spend the weekend holed up in the library. But my roommate, Ryan, convinced me to come out, saying it would be good to let loose for a night. I reluctantly agreed, figuring I could stay for an hour or two and then head back to the dorm. I was standing in the kitchen, nursing a beer and feeling out of place, when I first saw her. She was sitting on the back porch with a couple of friends, laughing at something someone had said. She was wearing this oversized sweater and ripped jeans, nothing fancy, but she looked so effortlessly beautiful. There was something about her that drew me in. I couldn't stop watching her. I remember feeling nervous, like, really nervous. I wasn't the kind of guy who could just walk up to a girl and start a conversation. But something about Sarah made me want to try. So, after about an hour of building up the courage, I finally made my move. I walked up to her, heart pounding in my chest, and said the first thing that came to mind. "Hey, I'm Jake. Do you mind if I join you?" She looked up at me, and I swear, for a second, I thought she was going to tell me to get lost. But then she smiled this warm, genuine smile that made me feel instantly at ease, and said, "Sure, why not?" We started talking, and from that moment on, I was hooked. She wasn't like anyone I had ever met before. We talked about everything, her love for psychology, my dreams of becoming a writer, our favorite movies, music, and all the random things that came up in between. It felt effortless, like we had known each other for years. By the end of the night, I had her number saved in my phone, and she told me to text her anytime. I remember walking back to my dorm with Ryan that night, grinning like an idiot. I knew I had just met someone special, someone who could change my life. Those first few months with Sarah were like something out of a movie. I couldn't believe how lucky I was. We started spending all of our time together, studying in the library, going to campus events, and hanging out in each other's dorm rooms, just talking for hours about anything and everything. It wasn't just physical attraction, though. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't that too. But it was deeper than that. I felt like I could talk to her about anything, like she understood me in a way no one else ever had. We had these late-night conversations about our hopes and fears, about what we wanted out of life. We'd stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning, lying on her bed, sharing our deepest thoughts. She'd tell me about her family, how she was the middle child, how her parents divorced when she was 12 and how that shaped the way she viewed relationships. I told her about the pressure I felt to succeed, about how my parents always expected me to be the best at everything and how that sometimes made me feel like I wasn't good enough. I remember one night, a few weeks after we started dating, when we spontaneously decided to go on a late-night drive. We didn't have a destination in mind. We just wanted to escape the campus for a bit. We ended up driving out to this small beach about an hour away from the university. It was cold, and we didn't have any blankets or anything, but we didn't care. We sat on the sand, huddled together, watching the waves crash against the shore under the moonlight. "I'm really glad I met you," Sarah whispered, her head resting on my shoulder. I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Me too." That was the night I realized I was falling in love with her. She made me feel like I could be myself, like I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. I felt seen, understood, in a way that I hadn't experienced before. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. Things stayed amazing for a long time. We dated all through college, and even though we had the usual ups and downs, it always felt like we were on the same page. We both had our own lives, our own friends, but we always came back to each other at the end of the day. When we graduated, things got more serious. We had both planned to stay in the city after college, and we decided it made sense to move in together. We found a small apartment, nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place downtown, but it was ours. It felt like the start of a new chapter, and I was excited to build a life with her. But moving in together wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. It wasn't that I didn't love living with Sarah, I did, but it came with its own set of challenges. We had been dating for 4 years by this point, but living together brought out sides of each other that we hadn't seen before. Sarah was a free spirit. She didn't care much about keeping the apartment tidy or sticking to a routine. I, on the other hand, like things to be organized. I'm a bit of a neat freak, and I'll admit that I can be pretty rigid when it comes to keeping things in order. At first, I tried to let it go. I figured it wasn't a big deal if she left her clothes on the floor or forgot to do the dishes once in a while. But after a few months, it started to get to me. I'd come home from work, and the apartment would be a mess, dishes piled up in the sink, clothes scattered everywhere, and Sarah would be sitting on the couch, watching Netflix, completely oblivious. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who nags about cleaning, but I couldn't help it. I'd ask her to help out more, and she'd say she would, but nothing ever changed. One night, after a long day at work, I snapped. The apartment was a disaster, and I couldn't take it anymore. Why do I always have to be the one to clean up? I asked, my frustration boiling over. Sarah looked up from the couch, surprised by my outburst. I'll clean it up later, Jake. It's not a big deal. But it is a big deal, I insisted. I feel like I'm the only one who cares about keeping this place together. It's like you don't even notice the mess. She sighed, clearly frustrated. I notice it, Jake. I just don't think it's worth getting upset over. We're both tired. Let's just relax. I wanted to relax, but I couldn't. The argument escalated from there, both of us saying things we didn't mean, and by the end of it, we were both hurt and angry. That was the first real fight we had, and it scared me. It wasn't just about the cleaning, it was about feeling like we were on different pages. I had always imagined that living together would bring us closer, but instead, it felt like we were growing further apart. I didn't know how to fix it, but I convinced myself that it was just a bump in the road, something we'd get through. As the months went on, those little fights started to add up. It wasn't just about cleaning or chores anymore, it was about everything. We started bickering about money, about how we spent our weekends, about the most insignificant things. And slowly, without either of us realizing it, we began to drift apart. Looking back now, I can see that the emotional distance between us started long before the breakup. But at the time, I was in denial. I kept telling myself that every couple goes through rough patches, that we'd bounce back like we always did. But the truth was, something had shifted. Sarah stopped opening up to me the way she used to. She'd come home from work, and instead of telling me about her day, she'd bury herself in her phone, scrolling through Instagram or texting her friends. When I'd ask her how she was feeling, she'd give me short, one-word answers, fine. Tired. Busy. I missed the long conversations we used to have, the way we used to talk for hours about everything, our dreams, our fears, our plans for the future. Now, it felt like we were just coexisting in the same space, going through the motions of a relationship without actually being in it. There were nights when I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had happened to us. I wanted to talk to Sarah, to tell her how I was feeling, but every time I tried, the words got stuck in my throat. I didn't want to push her away, didn't want to make things worse. So, I stayed silent, hoping that things would magically get better on their own. But they didn't. The distance between us only grew. Everything changed when Sarah got a new job offer about a year ago. It was a full-time counseling position at a private practice, a huge step up from the internship she had been doing. She was thrilled, and I was genuinely happy for her. I knew how hard she had worked for this, how much she wanted to build a career helping people. But with the new job came more responsibilities and more time apart. The practice was located across town, and the hours were long. Sarah would leave the apartment early in the morning and wouldn't get home until 9 or 10 p.m. most nights. At first, I tried to be supportive. I knew how much this job meant to her, and I wanted to give her the space to succeed. But as the weeks went on, I started to feel like I was losing her. Our schedules didn't align anymore. I'd come home from work around 6 p.m., make dinner for myself, and eat alone. I'd watch TV or work on my writing, waiting for her to come home. When she finally did, she was too exhausted to do anything but eat and collapse into bed. I missed her. I missed the way we used to spend time together, even if it was just sitting on the couch, talking about our day. Now, it felt like we were living separate lives. I was lonely, and I didn't know how to tell her that without sounding needy or unsupportive. One night, after another late night at work, I finally brought it up. "Do you think we're spending enough time together?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I could feel the anxiety bubbling under the surface. Sarah looked at me, clearly caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said, struggling to find the right words. "It just feels like we're drifting apart. We don't hang out like we used to. We barely talk." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Jake, I'm exhausted. This job is really demanding, and I'm doing the best I can. Can't you just be happy for me?" Her words stung. "I am happy for you, Sarah. But I miss you. I miss us." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands, her face a mix of frustration and guilt. Finally, she said, "This is just how it is right now. I don't know what else to say." That conversation stuck with me for weeks. I wanted to believe that things would get better once she settled into the new job, but deep down, I knew that something had changed. We weren't the same couple we used to be, and I didn't know how to get back to that place. As the months went on, the emotional distance between us grew more and more apparent. We still lived together, but it felt like we were just roommates, going through the motions of a relationship without really being in it. I kept waiting for things to get better, but instead, they only got worse. Sarah was always busy with work, and when she wasn't working, she was hanging out with her friends or spending time on her phone. We stopped going on dates. We stopped making plans for the future. Every weekend, I'd suggest doing something together, going to a movie, taking a day trip, even just having a picnic in the park, but she always had an excuse. "I'm tired. Maybe next weekend. I've got too much work to catch up on." At first, I tried to be understanding. I told myself that we were both just busy, that this was a phase and that we'd get through it. But as time went on, I started to feel like Sarah didn't care anymore. Like I was the only one trying to make things work. I remember one night, about 6 months ago, when we had one of the worst fights of our relationship. It started over something small. Sarah had canceled dinner plans with me last minute because she had to work late again. I was frustrated, tired of always being the one to compromise, and I let my emotions get the best of me. "I feel like I don't even matter to you anymore," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "You're always working, always busy. It's like I'm not even a priority." Sarah looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I'm doing my best, Jake. I don't know what else you want from me. I want you to care." I shouted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I want you to put in some effort. I want you to want to spend time with me." She stared at me for a long moment, and then, in the calmest voice I've ever heard, she said, "Maybe I don't want this anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What are you saying?" "I don't know," she whispered, looking down at her hands. I don't feel the same way I used to." That was the moment I knew. Even if she didn't say it outright, I knew. She was done. She had already checked out of the relationship, and I had been too blind to see it. The actual breakup happened a few months later, but I think I knew it was coming long before that. We had been drifting apart for so long that when Sarah finally ended it, it almost felt inevitable. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we had been planning to go out for lunch. I noticed that Sarah had been acting distant all week, but I didn't want to push her. I figured she was just stressed from work. But when she sat down across from me at the kitchen table, her face pale and her hands trembling, I knew something was wrong. "We need to talk," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart sank. I had heard those words before, and I knew what they meant. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but I could feel the panic rising in my chest. She took a deep breath, avoiding my gaze. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about us." My stomach twisted. "Okay, what do you mean?" She hesitated, then finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness. "I don't think this is working anymore, Jake. I don't think we're working." I stared at her, my mind racing. I wanted to believe that this was just another rough patch, that we could talk it out and figure things out like we always had. But the look on her face told me otherwise. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She bit her lip, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I think we should break up." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was sit there, staring at her in disbelief. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why now? After 5 years, why now?" She sighed, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know. I've been feeling this way for a while, and I didn't want to admit it. But I think we've grown apart, Jake. We're not the same people we were when we first got together." I wanted to argue, to tell her that we could fix it, that we could go to counseling or take a break and come back stronger. But deep down, I knew she was right. We had grown apart. We weren't the same people anymore, and no matter how much I wanted to hold on, I couldn't force her to stay. "I love you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't want to lose you." She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "I love you too, Jake. But sometimes, love isn't enough." The days after the breakup were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I packed up my things and moved out of our apartment, crashing at Ryan's place for a while. I couldn't stand being in the apartment we had shared for so long, surrounded by all the memories of our life together. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of Sarah, the photos of us on the fridge, the blanket we used to curl up under on the couch, the books we used to read together. I felt like I had lost a part of myself. The first few nights were the worst. I'd lie awake in Ryan's guest room, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of her. I kept replaying our breakup in my head, wondering if there was something I could have said or done to change her mind. I wondered if she was thinking about me, if she missed me at all. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to realize that Sarah had already moved on. She had made her decision, and there was no going back. I tried throwing myself into work, hoping that staying busy would keep my mind off of her. I took on extra projects, worked late hours, anything to avoid going home and being alone with my thoughts. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, Sarah was always there, lingering in the back of my mind. Nights were the worst. I'd scroll through old photos of us on my phone, torturing myself with memories of happier times. I missed her laugh, her smile, the way she used to curl up next to me on the couch. I missed us. I tried dating again after a few months, but it was a disaster. Every time I went out with someone new, I couldn't stop comparing them to Sarah. No one measured up. No one made me feel the way she had. It wasn't fair to the people I was seeing, but I couldn't help it. I was still in love with her, even though she was gone. After a few months of spiraling, Ryan suggested that I see a therapist. At first, I was resistant. I didn't think talking to a stranger about my problems would help. But eventually, I realized that I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't keep living in the past, holding on to something that was gone. I started seeing Dr. Haynes, a therapist Ryan recommended. The first few sessions were tough. I didn't know how to open up, didn't know where to start. But over time, I started to understand why I was so stuck, why I couldn't move on. Dr. Haynes helped me see that my identity had been so wrapped up in Sarah that when she left, I didn't know who I was anymore. I had spent 5 years building a life around her, around us, and when that was taken away, I felt lost. But slowly, I started to rebuild. I started to remember the things I used to love doing before I met Sarah: writing, playing guitar, going on solo hikes. I started reconnecting with old friends, people I had lost touch with during the years I was with Sarah. I began to realize that I could be okay on my own, that I didn't need to be in a relationship to be happy. Therapy was a slow process, but it helped me see things more clearly. It helped me understand that while Sarah and I had shared something special, it was okay to let go. It was okay to move on. It's been over a year since the breakup, and while I'm not going to pretend that everything is perfect, I'm in a much better place than I was before. The pain of losing Sarah hasn't disappeared, but it doesn't consume me like it used to. I've learned how to cope, how to move forward, and how to find happiness in my own life. I've started writing again, something I had put on hold while I was with Sarah. I'm working on my first novel, and for the first time in a long time, I feel excited about the future. I've also reconnected with my old band, and we've been playing gigs around the city, which has been a huge source of joy for me. I still think about Sarah sometimes, especially when I pass by places we used to go together or hear songs that remind me of her. But instead of feeling sadness, I've started to feel gratitude. Gratitude for the time we spent together, for the love we shared, and for the person I've become because of it. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm learning to be okay with that. I'm learning that it's okay to let go, that sometimes the things we hold on to the tightest are the things that keep us from growing. So that's my story, Reddit. Thanks for listening. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that even when you lose someone you love, you can still find a way to rebuild. It's not easy, but it's possible.